was not great. And that was one of the things for me that was very heartening about Obama's inauguration speech, and also, frankly, about his campaign. I want to come clean. I didn't vote for him. I'm a Green. I voted for Cynthia McKinney, a congresswoman from Georgia. But I have to say there's some positive things I can say about Barack Obama, and one of them is that he repeatedly hearkened to the two great revolutions of American history. The first revolution that began in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then spread to Boston and Lexington and Concord. And of course the second revolution that in some ways began here in Wisconsin and in Kansas and in Harper's Ferry, which Sarah and I were able to visit when we were out there in DC last week. And I'm talking about the War of Abolition in the time of Reconstruction. He refers to those two great revolutions, and I think it's a very powerful thing because he's calling us back to our greatest tradition. He's calling, in particular, not all Americans back, but he's actually calling the left back to our own greatest traditions, reminding us of what we have accomplished as a political tradition, the things that we have fought for in American history. I find that powerful. If I have a theme tonight, it's that the challenge that's in front of us really is comparable to the challenges that were faced by the abolitionists and by farmers in Western Massachusetts in their times. And you think about the kind of changes that they wrought, abolishing a monarchy, changing property relations, changing the relationship between men and women. Most people don't realize what a cultural revolution the American Revolution was in terms of the way in which men and women related to each other, in terms of property relations, women being allowed to own property. The fact that northern states did abolish slavery immediately at the time of the Revolution. We talk about this being a country that was born in slavery. Well, it was a country that was born half in slavery. I think that's just the reality if we want to come to grip with it. But when we look at what people are struggling with and what they're up against the greatest empire of all time, even greater than our own imperial power of the last century, the British Empire. They were up against corporations that were the largest corporations of all time. When the colonists were throwing the tea in Boston Harbor, they were destroying 20% of all the tea that was to be consumed in all of the Americas that year. Right? This is a massive act of sabotage. It was not just symbolic. And they were doing it against the greatest corporation, the largest corporation in world history that had its own private army that was committing acts of genocide not only in the Americas but also in India and around the world. So they were up against something big. Abolition, I don't need to tell you what was happening to abolitionists in the South, all across the South, who were facing lynchings and burnings and certainly suppression of the press. So we're up against something like that in some ways again today because we have an economic and ecological crisis that is historic. And when I look back to those generations, I ask myself, what was it that really caused them to succeed? And the thing that really comes to me is that they really did have a belief in their own capacity to affect change. They believed in their ability to win against incredible odds. And that is something that I think we have begun to feel now in this era, in this new day. And I think that there's a couple things that we can do to sort of have that feeling a little bit more, to help it flow, to bring it back. Because to be honest, progressives and the left have been, in my view, lost in a spirit of critique for most of the last century. We spent much more time telling people what was wrong rather than providing solutions. We spent much more time fighting with each other, assigning labels to each other, rather than building unity and moving forward and saying, we actually have a vision that not only that we want this country, but that we're actually going to implement. We're going to do this thing. And so I think that they had that belief because they knew where they came from and they knew where they were going. They knew their roots and they knew what their vision was. And I want to suggest to us today that we can look back to them and say, well, they had this sense of self-worth, this sense of capacity, and if they had a sense of roots and they had a sense of direction, well, then maybe that's what we really need too. And I think we've all got it lined up for us. I've talked a lot about the American Revolution here already, and I want to let you know that in terms of the question of where do we come from, we have a rich, powerful history of struggle and change and progress in this country that has should not only inspire us, but has inspired people all over the world, and we need to embrace that. Folks on the left need to embrace that. We need to take the best of the American tradition and stand on that. Because it's something good, it's something to be proud of, it's something to honor the sacrifices that so many people made. And I'm not talking 40 years ago, 50 years ago, or in terms of the civil rights movement. We're talking about the factory occupations across the upper Midwest, the industrial Midwest in the 1930s, the stories that we're all told on a regular basis. I'm talking about way back when. My organization, Liberty Tree, is named for a tree that stood in the Boston Common. The tree was an American elm tree, and it was the town, it was the town square, it was the gathering place for the radicals of the day. And so when they were organizing and agitating and holding their rallies, they would fly a flag from the Liberty Tree. And the flag, does anybody know what the flag had on it?
Don't tread on me.
It did have "Don't Tread on Me." They added that later. It also had 13 stripes, right? Red and white stripes. That was the flag of the Sons of Liberty. And the most famous incidents that came out of the Boston struggle against multinational corporations, let's be clear what they were up against. Their slogan of taxation, no taxation without representation, was about the fact that they didn't have representation, that they lived in a corporate government essentially, where the king was appointing governors who had no interest in hearing from the townspeople. The governors were attempting to shut down their town hall meeting process, right? They wanted to stop them from holding town hall meetings, didn't like that form of direct democracy. They were talking about the rabble getting together, and they allowed all kinds of people to come in and vote. Even blacks, even youth, even women were allowed to speak, right? So that was what the struggle was about. They came together at the Liberty Tree, they saw the flag, they would rally, they marched down to Boston Harbor, and that's where the Boston Tea Party happened, right? That's how it happened. They would, the famous Boston Massacre, that began with a march that started from the Liberty Tree. And the interesting thing about the Liberty Tree to me as a symbol is both its roots and also where it went as a symbol. Because when the British forces reoccupied Boston, they cut the Liberty Tree down. So we're going to take their gathering place away from them. We're going to prevent them from gathering. Well, that didn't do much good, because what people did all across the colonies was they consecrated new Liberty trees. So soon there were Liberty trees in every major community across the eastern seaboard. There were Liberty trees in what's now Canada, right? People in Newfoundland tried to secede as well. They tried to join the revolution. They didn't have enough people. They didn't succeed. So maybe they're occupied territory, right? Another story. And then the Liberty Tree also became an inspiration for movements all over the world. For folks who are familiar with the French Revolution, you see the Liberty caps, little red caps they wore. Well, you know where the Liberty caps came from? Those were Boston sailors' caps. The French saw what happened, and they emulated us. And they established Liberty trees in France. And they also established Liberty poles, right? Sometimes they didn't have a tree handy, so they just put up a pole. It's a town just down the road here, Liberty Pole, Wisconsin, right? So, there's a kind of internationalism, is I guess what I'm saying, to this history that's powerful. In Ireland, they established Liberty trees all over Ireland. They attempted to have a Republican revolution in Ireland. In Haiti, Toussaint, when he was captured after the second French crackdown on the revolution in Haiti, said, "You may have cut the tree of liberty of the free blacks of Santo Domingo to the ground, but its roots are deep and it will rise again." There are Liberty trees on the national flags of Argentina. There's a Liberty pole on the emblem of the Republic of Venezuela, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So there's some deep internationalism to this symbol. And to me, I like to share that information because it's not something they talk about in the history books. We're portrayed, the history of the American Revolution is portrayed as a nationalist revolution. It's portrayed as a coalition between some rabble, but then really the leaders were people like Washington and Jefferson. Not true, right? This was an international, primarily artisanal, i.e. working class movement that had profound impact. When Bolivar was throwing off the oppression of the Spanish in South America, Thomas Jefferson sent aid to help him. And by the way, some of our generals in the American Revolutionary War were Cubans, and they were Venezuelans, and they came here, right? So there's a rich history there that I think we should become more familiar with, and I would recommend some books. The First American Revolution by Ray Raphael is an incredible book. It's actually a good piece of strategy. If you want to know how to organize effectively, they had a pretty good strategy there in Western Massachusetts, explaining how they nullified imperial law.